friends, I am Rob here in the Lair of OmnusI. Today I'm going to do a video response to a YouTube video. The original video was done by, I believe his name is Justin. The YouTube site is Bankbar Como. Link will be in the description below. And my good friend Tim Harper, who I saw his video, he made a video response to the video that this gentleman made, and even though I wasn't familiar with him, he had some interesting insights and personal stories about house rules in role-playing games. And that's a pretty fertile topic for discussion. So while I have a breather in a moment to fire off a video, I thought I would do that. I'm doing it in the same style as they are. No silly hats, no, just me talking. So basically, the idea that I believe his name is Justin had was that he's gone through an evolution in his approach to house rules. In that at first he was all about rules as written. He then would come across little irritations, little things that didn't make a lot of sense, and he would make a house rule for it. He used an example of Marvel superheroes, which was a fairly standard percentile-based game. It wasn't inherently bad. I thought it was a little quirky, but it's nothing too serious. And he started finding himself making house rules for things that he didn't care for. And eventually he made like 4 pages full of house rules to make this game work the way he wanted it to, and got to the point where he really wasn't satisfied. So what he did was he shelved the game. He found other games that worked for his style better. And after that, as he, kept playing different games and having more experiences, he grew to embrace house rules. He came to accept that house rules are just kind of how we make sense of the artificial world that a role-playing game involves. And that was essentially his video. He also threw in a caveat that it's important to him that a person come to grips with what they're changing in regards to all of the impact that it's going to have in a game. It should be done with care and caution and a deep understanding of the game design principles. So Tim's response to that, again a response to a response, was that he was fine with house rules. So he thought house rules were okay, as long, and he threw out the cautionary tale that it's possible to put in too many house rules, and especially important to communicate house rules with your players. Because he ran a game, and he had a bunch of house rules in it. And the players were really turned off by all of these house rules that he had incorporated into the game. They didn't either understand them or they didn't like them, and it caused some friction in the group. He was also talking about simplifying more complex games like Rolemaster, which is a crunchy role-playing game with lots of rules and lots of ways of describing how you're going to do lots of different things. So both of them had roughly the same approach, in that role-playing games kind of engender house rules, and they're fine as long as they're well considered and they work for everybody in the group. And essentially my feeling is much the same. I don't think that, as the old expression goes, any battle plan survives contact with the enemy. I don't believe that any role-playing game really survives a thorough playthrough from a group of players. Almost everybody is going to find something that they would change if they could in any rule set. It could be something relatively minor. It could be, I don't like the skill system of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I wish there were more skills. I wish stealth wasn't just stealth. I wish it was moving silently and hiding. I wish there were different things. Because then maybe I could have elves have a racial ability that will help them with their hiding, for instance, and halflings have an ability that will help them with their stealth, perhaps. And, maybe bringing it back to other editions and incorporating other things. Tim also was talking about most of his changes were bringing the game more into line with BX, old school rule type games. And quite honestly, I think that there is a possibility of doing too much. And both of them were basically the opinion, if you've written a whole new game, go get a different game to play. You don't want to play that one, clearly. I honestly think that if you've made a whole new game, then make the game, commit to it, and finish it. I mean, if that weren't the case, then games like Castles and Crusades, or Swords and Wizardry, or all the retro clones and all the kind of close games wouldn't exist. And some of them are excellent. You wouldn't have things like the Black Hack. You wouldn't have games like the White Box. All of these different systems that owe a common source to something else. Think about all the Powered by the Apocalypse games. There's a lot of them out there, and all of them came off of a basic creditable source. They rewrote whole elements of that game to make the game they wanted, and it worked. So I think if you're making a lot of house rules, embrace that. Over the past few days on Facebook, I've heard some people who floated out some interesting ideas. One person floated out, I kind of covered this on a video that I did in my OmnusI Facebook page if you're interested. One person said that he had a Dungeon Master. They were playing Dungeons & Dragons, but the Dungeon Master didn't have the rules. He didn't have any of the books. But he was still taking a crack at it. Apparently he could tell a really good story. So instead what he did was he incorporated a person's armor into their hit points. And then he basically you didn't roll to hit. You rolled a damage roll, and if it was high enough, you hurt the person. If it was less, then it was represented as they got fatigued trying to avoid the blow. So, in essence, it basically just further abstracted things out from a 2-hit roll, a damage roll, an armor class that would move. Instead, your armor class was abstracted into, it's going to protect you from these number of blows. So, it's just basically adding more hit points onto your total. And that it would probably be easier, if you really thought about this, it would be easier to heal so much of the damage because that's just basically bruises and stuff until you get to a certain amount, say your bottom third of your hit points, which was actually woundage. Certainly possible. But it could be a house rule that somebody could easily expand into their own rule set. If they had that as one example of rules that changed when a person kind of knew a game system but not really, might have spawned off a whole new interesting game system and potentially still could. Another person who had an idea that any character could use any weapon. Weapon proficiencies, nonsense. Everybody can pick up a sword and kind of figure out how to swing it. But you're not going to be able to know how to do it well unless you have a reason to. So as a result, wizards and, say, thieves who don't particularly know how to use a lot of weapons, they only do a d4 damage no matter what weapon they have in their hand. A dagger is still going to be somewhat effective. Yeah, it's not big, it's not as likely to score a mortal wound, but you can poke somebody with it. A staff that you club somebody with is likely to hurt, but not likely to kill somebody unless you're really determined. But a greatsword in the hand of a wizard who doesn't really know how to swing it very well, the cuts are probably going to be relatively shallow. It's unlikely to really do a great deal of damage, so all their weapons do a d4 damage. Whereas a fighting type character, their weapons will do a higher damage because if they have a knife, they know how to really stick it and make it count. If they have a sword, they know how to get good full swings into it that have the same potential to do tremendous amounts of damage. So they would use just a flat die code for their damage, say a d10. It's an interesting approach. I don't have a problem with this. It's another level of abstraction. But it makes sense if you apply it and really kind of work the idea out throughout the entirety of the game, and it would be fine. A dragon's claws and bite attacks can all do the same damage. You don't need to have stat blocks. They have melee attack, does this much, and you've just simplified the game. The DM only has to worry about a couple of dice then for a single encounter. I can see that. Yes, a dragon can kill you with its teeth. Yes, a dragon can kill you with its claws. It's probably good at killing with both. So why have to have separate sets of damage? It makes sense from a certain simulationist point of view, but realistically, in a more narrative sense, abstract away, have fun. So I really don't have a problem with house rules. I myself have some experience with house rules. I made my own critical hit table back when I was young and playing first and second edition D&D. Would break it out whenever I played those games. It was a D20 roll. If you rolled a 20, you did triple all damage, and then it scaled down. Your biggest block of percentage, I think a 1 to 6, you just did double weapon damage. So it had something to celebrate when you would roll a 20, a natural 20, critical. I made a magical fumble table that was rather elaborate and caused all kinds of crazy things to happen. So when you got hit when you were casting a spell, you would roll and something odd would happen. Sometimes dangerous, sometimes funny. I went with funny. It was Think Wand of Wonders and much more elaborate. So I've house ruled before, but I think one of the important things to remember is this. In a game, most games are done with some sort of intelligent design. The game's creator put things into their game for a reason. And if you pull out things, there's nothing wrong with it. Even if the game is rock solid, absolutely perfect, it doesn't work for everybody because no game system works for absolutely everybody. So, Frankenstein away and everything. But oftentimes, rules as written covers the special flavor of the world they're presenting or the special reality that seems to happen in whatever experience they're trying to go for. Pulling things out may change your experience. If you, for instance, think that in the Star Wars D6 system, force points are a gimmick and that they're exploiting and not. You think of them as something that takes away from gameplay because the end is just, it's already, the big climactic fight comes, everybody spends a force point, fight's over in one round. You didn't make that fight very well, if that's the case, number one. And number two, if you change that, it's going to change the flavor of the game, where you feel that as a hero, you can do just about anything for at least one or two times when it's thematically and dramatically appropriate. So if you don't replace it with something, you flatten out the game. You take away some of the interest and the exciting elements that are there for the players to really grab onto. So I think that house rules should be well considered, especially when you think about pulling things out of games. I don't mind simplification generally. I think that, for instance, if you have a percentile-based game and you're like, I don't like rolling 2 dice, I'd rather only roll 1, so it's going to be a 1d10 game. Just round everything off and it's fine. Most of the time, that works just fine. As long as what happens in the span of 2-3 percentages don't really matter and everything goes by 5 or 10% blocks, by all means, just get rid of the 0 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I would be fine with that. Some people really don't like percentile dice, and D100s have their own unique problems, so that wouldn't bother me. I don't generally mind simplification. If you simplified elements of games, a lot of times you'll get to an earlier edition of the game. For instance, if you 5th edition D&D, you don't like backgrounds. Backgrounds. Just, you know what? Pick whatever you want. Say it's your background. Give yourself 2 extra skills, and I've got packs of gear for you to have. There you go. Technically not necessary at all. But, just like anything, like feats in 5th edition, it's optional. You don't have to use them if you don't want to. Just go without. You can weed it out, and then you're playing with things that are a bit more like 2nd edition, 1st edition. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't really think so. As long as you understand what you're doing, and have a reason for it, and if it makes sense for your game and it enriches the play for you and your players, it's perfectly fine. Honestly, I think that the additions that we have in the natural evolution of games is spurred by house rules. It's fairly clear to see the fingerprints on a game like, say, 2nd edition from 1st edition. THAC0 wasn't new. THAC0 was around in 1st edition, if you look through the DM's handbook. But honestly, things like proficiencies, people had been looking for ways to use those basic attributes to define what your character is capable of doing and not capable of doing. I'd seen it house ruled in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons before I ever saw proficiencies in 2nd edition. Basically, they just codified it and added a few extra rules. This skill is harder, therefore it requires more proficiency slots. And this skill, because it's more abstract, has a penalty to your attribute roll when you roll against it. Stuff like that. Relatively straightforward. Nothing too serious, it just added a little extra complexity to the game. And better served to codify what's possible and what's not possible. It's just evolution. And honestly, I think just enough people house ruled, and the idea got floated in a Dragon magazine about, hey, we can use these proficiencies. And then when the new edition came out, they're like, okay, let's address this, let's put it into the game. And they did, and it worked well enough. I didn't have any real problems with proficiency rules. So that's my thoughts. House rules are how people make sense of the universe. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes they are something that even the game designers would go, good idea, good idea. We'd think about that and putting that into the game. Maybe it's not so great, and the game designers will go, there's a reason why we didn't put that into the game. Sure, but if it works for your group, ultimately it's the experience of the group that's most important. And that's why house rules have been, from the very earliest days of role-playing games, one of those things that game designers have almost universally said. Our rules are guidelines. Honestly, if you don't like a rule, change it. If you think something's missing, add it. Just as long as you're happy with the end result, that's what's important. So, I certainly can't refute that. So, thank you very much for joining me. This has been a video response to a video response. Thank you again. I'll talk to you next time. Rob, out. Farewell.